The afternoon was quiet on Bukhansan Ridge Road, the kind of quiet that only exists in the richest parts of Seoul, where the houses sit behind iron gates and security cameras blink at empty streets. It was the kind of neighborhood where children were rarely seen and noise was considered an offense. That is why, when the scream came, every single person within 2 blocks froze where they stood. It was not just a scream. It was the kind of sound that bypasses your logic and goes straight to your spine. High-pitched, raw, desperate. The kind of sound a small child makes when they believe, with every cell in their body, that the worst possible thing in the world has just happened. Your dog ate my brother. Your dog ate my brother. Park Soo-yeon was 7 years old. She was standing at the iron gate of the largest estate on the street, the one with the black stone walls that stretched nearly 20 meters in either direction. The one with no nameplate, no buzzer label, no welcome mat. The one that every child in the surrounding neighborhoods had been warned about since before they could walk. She was wearing a yellow raincoat, even though the sky was perfectly clear. Her pigtails were unraveling, one ribbon already gone, and she was gripping the iron bars of the gate with both tiny hands, shaking them so violently the entire fence rattled like thunder. Tears were pouring down her face. Her nose was running. Her knees were scraped and bleeding. She had clearly fallen running here. And she was screaming at the top of her lungs at a house that, as far as anyone on the street knew, belonged to a man who had made entire city council members disappear with a single phone call. The neighbors cracked their doors open and peered out. One woman in a housecoat stepped halfway onto her porch and immediately stepped back inside. A delivery driver on the corner turned his scooter around without delivering a single package. 2 elderly men who had been playing badminton in the park across the street quietly picked up their rackets and walked away in opposite directions without saying a single word to each other. Nobody went to help the little girl. Nobody rang the bell for her. Nobody dared. Because the estate she was screaming at belonged to Kwon Tae-yong. And in Seoul's underground world, and quite honestly in Seoul's above-ground world too, the name Kwon Tae-yong was not said out loud unless absolutely necessary. Soo-yeon did not know any of this. She was 7. She just knew that her 5-year-old brother Minjun had been right beside her 10 minutes ago, and now he was gone, and the last thing she had seen before she squeezed her eyes shut in fright was the enormous black dog from behind this fence bounding toward them through a gap in the garden wall. She had screamed. She had run. And when she opened her eyes, Minjun was nowhere. So to her 7-year-old mind, the math was devastatingly simple. The dog ate her brother. She shook the gate again with everything she had. Give me back my brother. Your dog ate him. Give him back right now. A long silence followed. The security camera above the gate rotated slowly. Its red light blinked once. Twice. 3 times. Then, with a sound like a giant exhaling, the black iron gate clicked and began to slide open.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this video, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button right down there. It's completely free, it helps the channel grow more than you know, and you'll never miss a video from me again. Also, smash that like button if you're finding this helpful. It seriously makes a difference. Alright, back to it.
Kwon Tae-yong was 44 years old, and he had not been surprised by anything in at least a decade. He had built his empire through silence, patience, and a near supernatural ability to read people before they opened their mouths. He was not a man who rattled. He was not a man who raised his voice. He had, on more than one occasion, sat perfectly still and calm while men twice his size tried to intimidate him, and he had simply waited until they exhausted themselves, and then he had spoken 2 or 3 words very quietly, and the situation had resolved itself entirely in his favor. He was the kind of man whose stillness was more frightening than other men's fury. He was sitting in his study on the 2nd floor, reviewing a series of documents related to a real estate investment on Jeju Island, when his head of security, a thick-necked man named Do Sung-jin, knocked twice and entered. Sir. Sung-jin paused. He was one of the few people in the world who could read Kwon Tae-yong's silences the way other people read sentences, and right now he was trying to figure out how to phrase what he needed to say. There is a situation at the front gate. I saw, Tae-yong said, without looking up from his documents. Sung-jin blinked. You saw? The camera feed is on my secondary screen. Taeyong finally set down his pen. He looked up. His eyes were dark and completely unreadable. A little girl. Yellow raincoat. She believes Gom ate her brother. Yes, sir. Should I send her away? Call someone. Taeyong was already standing up. He buttoned the top button of his shirt slowly, deliberately. Open the gate. Sung Jin stared at him. Sir. Sung Jin. Yes, sir. Opening the gate. By the time Kwon Taeyong stepped through his own front door and walked down the stone path toward the entrance, Soo-yeon had already stormed 4 steps inside the gate, chin raised, face red and furious and terrified all at once. The specific expression of a child who is more scared than they have ever been in their life, but has decided that being scared is not an option right now because someone needs to be saved. She saw him coming and she did not run. To her credit, she did not even flinch. She pointed at him with one small, scraped finger. Your dog, she said loudly and clearly. Ate he my brother. His name is Park Min-jun. He is 5 years old, and he likes dinosaurs and you need to get him back right now. Taeyong stopped walking. He stood approximately 3 meters away from her. He looked at her for a long moment, not the way adults usually look at screaming children, with impatience or amusement or condescension. He looked at her the way he looked at his documents, like she was something worth understanding. What color was your brother's jacket? He asked. Soo-yeon blinked. That was not the question she expected.
Blue.
With a triceratops on it. Taeyong nodded once, slowly. Come with me, he said. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me where Min-jun is. I'm going to take you to him. She stared at him. You know where he is? Gom knows where he is, Taeyong said simply. And I know where Gom is. Before we go any further, you need to understand Gom. Gom meant bear in Korean. And the dog had been given that name not because he looked like a bear, though he did, somewhat, with his enormous square head and his thick black fur that seemed to absorb all available light, but because of the way he moved through the world. Slowly, deliberately, with a heavy, rolling confidence that suggested nothing could touch him, and more importantly, that he had no interest in touching anything that didn't need him. Kwon Taeyong had found Gom 6 years ago, or rather, Gom had found him. The dog had appeared outside the estate on a freezing February morning, sitting calmly in the snow as though he had a meeting scheduled. No collar, no tag, thin but not broken. Looking up at the security camera with an expression that Taeyong's staff described as either deeply intelligent or deeply unnerving, depending on who you asked. Taeyong had opened the gate. Gom had walked in, located the warmest room in the house, and gone to sleep. That had been that. In 6 years, Gom had never once shown aggression toward a human being. He had, however, on 4 documented occasions, gently and firmly herded individuals away from places they should not have been going. A drunk businessman who'd wandered onto Taeyong's property through a broken section of fence, a young woman who was about to fall into the koi pond in the back garden while staring at her phone, a teenager who had climbed the wall on a dare, and once, memorably, one of Taeyong's own associates who had been reaching for a document he absolutely was not authorized to touch. In each case, Gom had simply positioned himself between the person and the problem, applied gentle but immovable pressure with his body, and redirected them somewhere safe. Taeyong's staff had a phrase for it. They called it being gommed. Nobody had ever been hurt. Nobody had ever been bitten. Nobody had ever been eaten. What Gom did was guide. What Gom did was protect. What Gom did, in his slow, enormous, utterly calm way, was decide that certain things and certain people needed to be somewhere else, and then ensure they got there. Taeyong understood this perfectly. He had understood it from the very first morning. The problem was that nobody else did. Taeyong led Soo-yeon along the left side of the stone path, past a row of carefully pruned persimmon trees. She walked beside him with a stiff, furious dignity, the way someone walks when they are absolutely terrified but have decided that walking was better than running because running might make her look like she had given up on Min-jun, and she had not given up on Min-jun. Sung-jin followed 3 steps behind, watching the little girl the way you watch something that might unexpectedly bite you. How did your brother end up near my property? Taeyong asked. His voice was conversational.
Calm.
We weren't supposed to come this far, Soo-yeon admitted, and then immediately pressed her lips together like she hadn't meant to say that. We live 4 blocks over. We were looking for my ball. It rolled. And then we saw the gap in your wall. The section near the old elm tree. Yes. She glanced up at him sideways. How did you know? I've been meaning to have it repaired, he said simply. Well, you should, she told him firmly. Because your dog came through it and scared us. I screamed and I ran, and when I turned around Minjun was gone, and the dog was gone, and that means… Her voice cracked just slightly. She gathered herself immediately. That means the dog has him. Somewhere. Minjun is not inside Gom, Taeyong said, and despite everything, the smallest crease appeared at the corner of his mouth. That is not something Gom does. Then where is he? They turned the corner around the main house, and the back garden opened up in front of them. It was extraordinary, not the manicured show garden type of extraordinary, but the kind that comes from things being allowed to exist as they wanted to. Old trees. A wide sweep of grass. A creek that wound through the far end of the property and disappeared under a stone bridge. There were benches placed under the biggest trees, and a low stone wall that formed a kind of enclosure near the bridge, a natural hollow, sheltered, warm, protected on 3 sides from the wind. Taeyong pointed at the hollow. Soo-yeon looked, and her breath came out of her in one enormous, wobbling exhale. There, in the hollow beside the stone bridge, sat Park Min-jun, 5 years old, blue jacket, triceratops on the front. He was sitting cross-legged on the grass. He was not crying. He was not hurt. He was not scared. He was leaning against Gom's enormous side with his small head resting against the dog's thick fur, looking up at the sky through the branches of the tree above him with the completely serene expression of a child who has absolutely no idea that a nationwide catastrophe has been occurring on his behalf. Gom looked up when Taeyong and Soo-yeon appeared. He thumped his tail against the ground twice. Then he looked back down at Minjun with an expression that could only be described as professional satisfaction. Minjun. Soo-yeon flew across the garden. Minjun looked over. His face lit up. Soo-yeon, I made a dog friend. Look how big he is. Soo-yeon crashed into her brother and held him so tightly he made a small oof sound and patted her on the back with one hand in the way small children pat adults who are being overly emotional. She pulled back and grabbed his face in both hands and examined him like a doctor. Both eyes. Both ears. His jacket. His hands. Are you hurt? Did anything? I'm fine, Minjun said patiently. The dog sat next to me. It was very warm. I told him about dinosaurs, and he listened to the whole thing. Soo-yeon turned around and looked at Gom. Gom looked back at her. He was sitting very still, which made him seem even larger than he was. His dark eyes were calm and direct. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Kwon Taeyong, who had walked up quietly behind her and was now standing with his hands folded behind his back, watching all of this. Why did he bring him here? She asked. When Gom finds someone small near the road or near water, he brings them to a safe place, Taeyong said. This hollow is the place he considers safest on the property. It is enclosed. It is dry. It is away from the road. He paused. When your sister ran, your brother lost his balance and fell. Gom placed himself beside him, so he would not be frightened. Then he guided him here. Soo-yeon stared at Gom. Gom stared back. He thumped his tail again, not eagerly, like dogs do when they want approval, but steadily, like someone confirming a fact. He didn't eat him, she said slowly. No, Taeyong confirmed. He kept him safe. Yes. Soo-yeon was quiet for a moment. Then she walked up to Gom carefully, stopped about a foot away, and held out her scraped hand. Gom leaned forward and sniffed it gently. Then he pressed his enormous nose briefly against her palm, just once, warm and soft, and pulled back. Soo-yeon exhaled. I screamed at your gate, she said to Taeyong, without looking at him. You did, he agreed. I called your dog, Hey, a brother eater. You were scared, he said. You were trying to protect someone you love. That is not something to be sorry for. She finally turned and looked up at him. At 44, Kwon Taeyong was not a man who people usually looked at directly. His face was angular and closed and carried the kind of gravity that comes from years of being the most dangerous person in any room. Children, especially, tended to look away. Soo-yeon Park looked directly at him, the same way she'd looked at his gate. Like she had decided that looking away was not an option. "Why does your dog save children?" she asked. Taeyong was quiet for a moment. This was not a question he had been asked before. "He has always done it," he said finally. "Since the first day I had him. I do not know why. Some things have no explanation. They simply are what they are." Soo-yeon considered this seriously. "Maybe," she said, "he does it because someone should." Kwon Taeyong had not been surprised by anything in a decade. That was the second time in one afternoon he had been proven wrong.
Before we keep going, if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now and join the family. We drop new videos every week and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Tap the bell too so you get notified the second we go live. Okay, let's get back into it.
While Soo-yeon and Minjun sat in the garden, Minjun continuing his lecture on the dietary habits of the Stegosaurus to a now seated and apparently fully attentive Gom, Sung-jin stood several meters back and watched his employer. He had worked for Kwon Taeyong for 11 years. He had watched him negotiate contracts that would make accountants weep. He had watched him handle betrayals with surgical coldness. He had watched him walk into rooms where everyone was armed and be the most dangerous person there by doing absolutely nothing at all. He had never watched him stand in his own garden with his hands behind his back, looking at 2 children and a dog, and look like that. Sung-jin could not fully describe what that was. Taeyong's face had not changed, it never did, not really. But something behind his eyes was different. Softer was not the right word. More open, perhaps. Like a window that had been painted shut for many years, and someone had quietly worked the latch. He had not told the children to leave. He had not rushed them. He had not immediately had staff escort them off the property the moment it was clear the boy was safe. He had just stood there, watching a 7-year-old girl demand explanations from him with all the authority of someone 3 times his age, and he had answered her. Honestly. Fully. "Sir," Sung-jin said quietly, moving up beside him. "Should I call someone to take the children home? Their parents may be worried." "Find out where they live," Taeyong said. "We'll drive them." Sung-jin blinked. "We'll drive them?" "Yes, Sung-jin. That is what I said." In one of our cars?" Taeyong turned and looked at him with that expression that very gently suggested Sung-jin should stop asking questions and start completing tasks. "Yes, sir," Sung-jin said. "Right away." He stepped away to make arrangements and paused once, briefly, to look back over his shoulder. Taeyong had walked back toward the hollow and was now standing at a respectful distance while Minjun explained something to him, both hands moving, utterly unself-conscious, and Taeyong was listening to a 5-year-old explain the difference between a brontosaurus and a brachiosaurus with the same focused attention he gave to board meetings and contract negotiations. Sung-jin had been in this business long enough to know which things you kept to yourself. He filed this moment carefully away in that category and made the call. Soo-yeon asked, about 20 minutes later, if they could have something to drink before they went home because Minjun's voice was getting scratchy from talking so much. It was delivered as a statement rather than a request, with the implication that the correct answer was yes. Taeyong led them inside. The kitchen was large and very clean. One of the household staff, a woman named Mrs. O who had worked for Taeyong for 9 years and had long since developed complete immunity to being startled by anything, simply raised her eyebrows briefly when 2 children and an enormous dog walked in behind her employer, and then set about making barley tea and finding the tin of butter cookies she kept in the back of the 3rd cabinet. Minjun sat at the kitchen table and immediately began rearranging the sugar bowl and the salt and pepper shakers into what he explained was a dinosaur habitat. Gom settled himself on the floor near Minjun's chair with a heaviness that made the floor seem to exhale. Mrs. O set cookies on the table without being asked. Soo-yeon sat across from her brother with her hands folded in front of her. She was looking at the kitchen, at the high ceilings, the single orchid on the windowsill, the row of very serious-looking books on the shelf by the door, and her expression had settled into something quieter than it had been outside. "You live here alone?" she asked Taeyong. He was standing near the counter, not sitting, the way people stand when they are not sure if they are welcome to sit. "Yes," he said. "It's very quiet." "It is. Doesn't it feel lonely?" Mrs. O made a very small movement near the stove that might have been a suppressed reaction of some kind. Taeyong was quiet for a moment. "I have Gom," he said. Soo-yeon looked at Gom. Gom's eyes were closed. He was breathing slowly, and Min-jun had, at some point, rested one foot on his back while still arranging the sugar bowl, and Gom was tolerating this without complaint. "He's a good dog," Soo-yeon said. "He's the best dog," Taeyong said, and there was something in the plainness of it, the complete lack of performance, that made it land differently than it might have otherwise. Soo-yeon looked at him again with those direct, unsettling eyes. "Are you a good person?" she asked. Mrs. O set her wooden spoon down very quietly. Taeyong looked at the 7-year-old for a long moment. "That depends on who you ask," he said. Soo-yeon considered this with great seriousness. "I'm asking you," she said. Another long moment. "I try to be," he said finally. "I do not always succeed." She nodded slowly, as if this was a satisfactory and honest answer, which it was. "My mom says that's the same for everyone," she told him. "She says the difference is whether you try." "Your mother sounds like a smart person." "She is," Soo-yeon agreed. "She's a nurse. She helps people." She paused. "What do you do?" Kwon Taeyong, the man about whom at least 4 separate government agencies had open investigation files, who operated 11 different holding companies across 3 countries, who had not answered a personal question from an adult in longer than he could remember, looked at a 7-year-old girl in a yellow raincoat and said, "I manage things." "What kind of things?" "Problems, mostly." Soo-yeon accepted this. "Gom manages things too," she observed. "He managed Min-jun." "He did," Taeyong agreed. "Maybe that's why you understand each other," she said thoughtfully. "You're the same kind." The car that pulled up to take Soo-yeon and Min-jun home was black and very clean and had tinted windows. It sat in front of their building like something from a different world. Their mother, Park Ji-hye, had called Soo-yeon's phone 7 times in the past 40 minutes. When she burst out of the building entrance to find both her children stepping out of a car she did not recognize, her expression went through approximately 6 different emotions in about 2 seconds. Relief, confusion, anger, relief again, confusion again, and then a kind of speechless, wide-eyed uncertainty as she took in the car, the driver holding the door, and then the tall, grave-faced man stepping out of the front passenger seat. Taeyong had Sung-jin drive. He had, in a decision that surprised his entire staff, elected to ride with the children rather than send them alone. He had told himself it was because Min-jun had fallen asleep against Gom in the garden and the dog had gently nudged him awake only when the car arrived, and he wanted to make sure they got in safely. This was true. It was not the complete truth, but it was true. Ji-hye stood on the steps with both hands pressed to her mouth, watching Min-jun sprint toward her with his arms out. "Mommy, I met a bear dog." And absorbing this, Taeyong walked up to the steps and stopped at the bottom. He did not come closer. "Your children are not hurt," he said. "The situation was a misunderstanding. I wanted to make sure they arrived safely." Ji-hye looked at him. She was a small woman, maybe 35, with capable hands and exhausted eyes, and the specific kind of composure that comes from years of emergency rooms. She was looking at Taeyong the way nurses look at difficult cases, professionally, directly, without flinching. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "A neighbor," he said. It was technically accurate. Ji-hye looked at the car. She looked at Sung-jin, standing at the driver door. She looked back at Taeyong. She was clearly doing calculations, the kind of calculations a person does when they are putting together a picture they are not entirely sure they want to see completed. Then she looked at Soo-yeon, who was standing beside her and who said, very simply, "His dog kept Min-jun safe, Mom. He's okay. He brought us home." Ji-hye looked at her daughter. Soo-yeon met her eyes steadily. Ji-hye bent down and hugged Soo-yeon tightly, briefly, and then straightened. She looked at Taeyong again. "Thank you," she said. Just that. But the way she said it, Quietly, without performance, the way someone says something they absolutely mean. It was the kind of thank you that doesn't need anything added to it. Taeyong inclined his head once. The section of wall near the elm tree will be repaired by tomorrow morning, he said. Your children won't be able to get through again. He turned and walked back to the car. Sir, Sung Jin said quietly, holding the door. Don't, Taeyong said, just as quietly. I wasn't going to say anything, Sung Jin said. Good. He got in the car. As Sung Jin pulled away from the curb, Taeyong looked once in the side mirror. Minjun was waving at the car enthusiastically, with both arms, from the steps. Jihai had one hand on his shoulder, and was watching them leave. Suyun was watching too, still, direct, and when the car had almost turned the corner, she raised one hand in a small, serious wave. Taeyong looked forward again. He said nothing. His face showed nothing. But Sung Jin, who had known him for 11 years, noticed that his employer sat with slightly less of that particular tension in his shoulders for the rest of the drive home, and that when they got back to the estate and Gom came trotting up to meet them at the door, Taeyong crouched down and put his hand on the dog's enormous head and held it there for a moment, quietly, the way you hold on to things that matter. By the next morning, the story had already moved through the neighborhood like weather. The woman in the housegoat told the woman across the hall. The delivery driver mentioned it at the depot. The two elderly men who had been playing badminton found each other at the park again and discussed it for a very long time in low voices. The way the story moved, the way stories like this always move, was with each telling it was shaped a little differently by the person telling it, but the core stayed the same, and the core was strange and real and impossible to dismiss. The terrifying man behind the black stone walls had opened his gate for a screaming little girl. His dog had not eaten anybody. His dog had, in fact, done the opposite. There were people in certain offices, the kind of offices in tall buildings in the Gangnam district in rooms with frosted glass and no windows, who noted the story the way they noted everything that touched Kwon Taeyong. They analyzed it. They debated what it meant. They produced no useful conclusions. Gom, for his part, did not change. He continued to do what he had always done. He walked the property in his slow, rolling way. He sat near the gap in a wall on the morning the repair crew came to fix it, watching them work with calm authority, and then walked away once the wall was solid again. He slept in the warmest room in the house. He listened when Taeyong read documents aloud, because some habits don't need explanation. Suyun wrote something in a school project 3 weeks later, a short paragraph titled, "A Person I Admire," that her teacher nearly sent home with a note because she wasn't sure she understood it. The paragraph read, "I admire a man who lives near my house. I don't know much about him, but he has a dog that protects children when they are scared and lost. The man says the dog does it because someone should. I think the man is more like the dog than he knows. Some people look scary on the outside, and people don't always see them right. My mom says you can tell who someone really is by what they do when they don't have to do anything. He didn't have to open the gate. He didn't have to bring us home. But he did. I think that makes him a good person, even if other things about him are complicated." The teacher decided not to send a note home. She read the paragraph again, quietly, after the other students had gone to lunch. She wasn't sure she could say it any better herself. Minjun, meanwhile, asked his mother 17 times over the following month if they could go back to visit the bear dog. His mother said they would see. She said it in the specific way that sometimes means no and sometimes means something more than yes, and she would not clarify further. Kwon Taeyong did not know about the school project. He did not know about the 17 requests. He did not know that his name, carefully never said out loud, described only as the man with a dog, was being passed through a neighborhood that had previously only whispered it with fear, and that something in those whispers had shifted. He simply continued to be what he was. Complicated, difficult, powerful in ways that exist in the gray space between legal and not. And also, a man who had opened a gate for a screaming child. A man who had answered questions he had never answered before. A man who crouched down and put his hand on the head of a dog that kept children safe in stonewall hollows near old elm trees, because someone should, and held on for just a moment longer than necessary. Some stories are not about transformation. Not every hard person becomes soft. Not every closed door swings all the way open. Some stories are just about a single afternoon where something true was briefly visible, the way light falls through a gap in a wall. There, and then gone, but real while it lasted. The little girl saw it. The dog always knew. And, in the end, that was enough. Quick pause. If this kind of content is useful to you, subscribing is the best way to make sure you keep seeing it. I put out videos on Seoul Night Tales regularly, and the subscribe button is right below this video. Takes 1 second. And if you've got questions or want to see something specific, drop it in the comments. I read all of them. Now, let's keep going.